ICQ Podcast, episode 357, questions, answers and tips. Well, hello and welcome to our fellow amateur ham radio enthusiasts to this, our 357th episode of the ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by David Reed, Whiskey 6 Kilo Lima, David Strachan, 2 Mike 0 Whiskey Hotel X-Ray, and our monthly annual subscription donors. In this episode, I am joined by Leslie Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, Edmund Mike 0 Mike November Golf, and Martin Mike 1 Mike Romeo Bravo to discuss latest amateur radio news. As myself, Colin 6BRY rounds up the news in brief, and this episode we feature questions, answers and tips. Well, as always, it's the very kind donations from you, our listeners, that keep this show advert-free and paying its way on the internet. And this episode, we'd like to thank David Reed, Whiskey 6 Kilo Lima, and also David Strachan, 2 Mike 0 Whiskey Hotel X-Ray. David says, many thanks to you and the rest of the ICQ podcast team for producing such a great program. So many thanks for your kind words there, David. The support, along with our monthly subscription donors, as they keeps us advert-free, paying their way on the internet, and as say, make sure we can keep producing the show for you, as we've been doing it for the last 13 years on a fortnightly basis. If you would like to support the work we do and show the value you receive from the show, it's a very simple thing we ask you to do. We ask you to think of how much value you got from the show, maybe in comparison to buying a cup of coffee or going to the movies, or buying some something like a CD or a DVD, etc. Turn that into monetary value, and then visit icqpodcast.com/donate, where either one of our options, or free to choose your own, and send it our way along with a message, and we'd greatly appreciate it and give you a shout out on the next show. Right, we're talking about the show. We're going to produce another great show for you. This episode, I'm joined by Leslie, Martin and Edmund to discuss and generate thoughts regarding the latest amateur ham radio news, including PMR 446 prosecutions and an ARRL RF exposure calculator. As always, hope you enjoy.
What you doing?
Feeding the chickens.
Well, are you going to take the challenge?
Yep, I plan to. You?
I'm thinking about it. What about the big guns? Think they'll win?
They didn't last year, but then they didn't show up either.
Is that why you're feeding the chickens now?
Yep. Champions are never afraid of competition. Will you take the challenge? See foxmikehotel.com/challenge.
Well, hi everybody. Welcome to episodes 357's News Roundtable. And you're not used to hearing my voice usually in the chair. I do it once every so often, so it's Colin here, M6BOY. And so I'll be chairing this episode's News Roundtable. I'm joined this episode by people that are more knowledgeable about amateur radio than I will probably ever be, who will give you their insights on the news that's been going on the last fortnight. So we're joined first by Leslie Butterfield, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo. Good day to Leslie, and welcome to this episode of the show.
Good evening, Colin. I can't believe it's 357. Did you say 357?
I said 357. Yep, we're teenagers, 13 years old as a podcast, and still misbehaving as we do.
And when you said somebody more knowledgeable, I was looking around in the room and I couldn't see anyone else in there. But thank you in any way for that compliment.
You're welcome, my friend. You're welcome. Edmund Spicer joins us from the south coast of the UK. Mike 0, Mike November Golf. Edmund, I say good day to you, and welcome to this episode, and great to catch up with you.
Hello, Colin. Hello, everybody.
And just in case you thought you might be missing this episode, we're also joined by Martin, M1MRB, and you're crossing to the other side this evening, Dad, and let me chair the episode. So thank you for letting me take over for a show.
Yeah, no problems, Colin. I thought I'd behave myself, and when you said more knowledgeable people, I looked round and realised Mrs. B had left the room. So I'll have to behave myself.
Exactly. So help us all, everybody. Help us all. Apologies from Dan and Ruth, who unfortunately can't be with us this evening. And as I say, we look forward to them joining us in a future show. Right, well, let's start off with our news roundtable. And we're going to start off with our first news story here. And this is a freedom of information request, it looks like, that was put into Ofcom here in the UK regarding PMR 446 and potentially the number of prosecutions on the 446 bands in the UK, and if there was any involved. I wonder what this is all about and when this comes from. So, Dad, I'll let you pick this one up first. And as I say, what's your thought on potentially this 446 freedom of information request?
Okay, Colin, no problems at all. Well, 446 in the UK is license free. So it's a license free on UHF. I believe now there's 16 channels, although originally it used to only be 8. And it is crippled because it is license free to half a watt, and you cannot remove, or you're not supposed to be able to remove the antennas and put better antennas on them. So they are very, very local range, low range, sort of thing you'd use on a campsite or that sort of thing. No license required. But what they're asking is, has anybody been caught doing naughties on these frequencies? And it looks like not. Interestingly, when I owned a Yaesu 847, FT847 a few years ago, the modification to give me the extra 100k on 40 meters when we went from 7 megs to 7.2 instead of 7.1 meg, that also opened up the UHF. And although I never did it, my 7 was capable of 50 watts on the 446 frequencies. So, yeah, interesting. It's one of those interesting stories. Be interesting to find out if there is any problems, because nobody's been prosecuted, Colin.
So, I mean, that's a question for you, Edmund. I know you're a big user of 446, and I wondered if you come across too many problems on the people using the band that might have triggered off this a request for information to find out if people really are misusing it, and any prosecutions in the UK.
Well, I am rather curious as to what prompted this freedom of information request in the first place, because anybody who's familiar with Ofcom's enforcement record from the amateur side of things would have been able to hazard a reasonably good guess that the answer to this question would be 0 prosecutions or something close to 0. And it's perhaps worth noting, incidentally, that 0 prosecutions and no enforcement action of any kind whatsoever are not exactly the same thing. But anyway, knowing that the answer was likely to be 0, what is to be gained by asking the question? Because anybody who is minded to operate on PMR 446 running excessive power is in all likelihood going to do it anyway, irrespective of whether this freedom of information request went in or not. And because it has gone in, Ofcom may, if they've got the idea of having a purge in their minds, this may be the stick that pokes the hornet's nest. That's not without precedence. I seem to remember, shortly after I got my M0, so 2013, 2014, somewhere around there was a spate of incidents of Ofcom having a word with people or knocking on doors and offering a few words of friendly advice without going all the way to prosecution, and potentially seizing some equipment if you believe what's written on certain internet forums. So, yeah, I just don't understand what the point of this is, other than if maybe the person posing the question thought that an answer of 0 would be a tacit green light from Ofcom to go ahead and basically do whatever you like. It should be extremely dangerous because PMR 446 has been around in the UK since April 1999. So just because there haven't been any prosecutions in 20 years doesn't mean that Ofcom couldn't start tomorrow if they were so minded and so resourced. And if you're thinking about running more than half a watt, if you really must do it, limit it to 2 watts out of a Baofeng BF888S or something like that. Because the big problem with running excessive power is that the proper users of the band who are using legal 500 milliwatt ERP equipment and it's the equipment, incidentally, that's license free, not the band. Make that distinction there. If everybody else is running 500 milliwatts and you're running 50 watts, and worse still, if you do it into a Yagi, it is perfectly possible that you are interfering and causing problems with loads and loads of users who might all be transmitting back to you, telling you that, but because they're running so much less power than you are, you'll never hear them. And I know some people take the attitude of, well, who cares, so what, do what you like, I'm all right, Jack. But that's not the way to behave with radios on any bands. And I noticed from elsewhere in my life that the people who advocate that kind of approach are usually the ones who squeal first and loudest and longest if they themselves are on the receiving end of somebody else who's taking that very same approach. So yeah, don't do it, kids. And if the person was here with us on the podcast who put this freedom of information request in, my first question to him would be, why? Back to you, Colin.
Yeah, I suppose, Leslie, any ideas why this might have happened, or any thoughts on this one from your end?
I don't know why he put it in, to be honest. That would be a question for the gentleman concerned. However, what I did do is I looked at the reply from Ofcom, and in its, shall we say, unique style, it came up with the answer that I thought it was going to say. And it says, we are not aware of any prosecutions, and Ofcom treats each case on its own merits, aiming to comply. And then it comes out with the phrase, in doing so, we may issue specific guidance to rectify breaches, etc. And I'm just paraphrasing that. This has led to compliance with licensing conditions not requiring prosecution. So a quiet word in someone's ear is basically what they're saying. Look, we're radio amateurs. We police ourselves. We sort ourselves out. And Ofcom, in my experience, aren't going to get involved unless there's been a complaint of some description, something is in writing that there's a problem. Why should they? And then if they get something in writing that there's an issue, and then they follow it up. So this is where we're at the moment. Like from what I'm reading, they don't like prosecution. And if people are sensible and they get some, shall we say, friendly words of advice and follow that, there's not a problem. Over to you, Colin.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Leslie. I mean, that line is quite important, isn't it? This has led to compliance with license conditions and not require prosecution. So I think, as you rightly say, gentle nudges and welcome advice seems to be the way that they've maybe policed it in the past, and has certainly gotten the results they're looking for. So yeah, it's interesting, obviously, the fact that there is obviously stuff going on 446, which is obviously undesirable, but at the same time, isn't it positive that people are changing their ways without actually having to beat them with the big stick? So I suppose let's take the positives away with that story as well. Right, Dad, you really love this new story coming up next. You're very positive about it. In Hyderabad, there's amateur radio operators there are developing a low-cost transverter for the QO100 satellite. This is a story that you found really interesting coming out of India.
I certainly did, Colin, and I thought this was quite a good one because these are the first people who have come up with a transverter to be able to work that satellite. Now, the QO100 is the geostationary satellite. So if this is a nice little transverter that's reasonably priced, and I would suggest it may very well be, then this could get a lot more people, A, onto satellites, but B, onto that particular satellite. So I think that's quite good. And the fact that it's come out of India is good, because there isn't a week goes by where we don't get a news story of something happening in India. We don't always run every Indian news story on this podcast, but there's a lot going on in India at the moment, amateur radio. So my question is, is amateur radio the next new thing in India, or taking off phenomenally in India? And secondly, with people like these guys who've produced this transverter, and Farhan, who produced the Bitex range of transceivers, there's a lot happening in India, and I get quite excited at some stuff coming out of it, Colin.
Yeah, interestingly, if this is something that I say for consideration. 22,000 amateur radio operators in India, according to a stat that I've just pulled up. So interesting, the good number of, potential amateurs there in India, to come up from there. So, Edmund, any thoughts from your side of things? Obviously, what these 20,000, hands in India, they're coming up with this Transverter. It's good news for the hobby, isn't it? And great news for innovation.
And good news as well in terms of getting people active on the QO100 geostationary satellite. I only know of 2 people local to me. Both of them are G4s, been licensed since the 1980s, and both of them have done incredibly clever and technical things on the VHF, UHF and microwave bands. And some of the equipment that they use and build just absolutely blows my mind. And being active on QO100 is something I would like to do eventually. But it's clearly not something that's within the scope of most newcomers to the hobby, or even people like me who predominantly come from the operating and talking side of the house rather than the construction side. So if this becomes commercially available at a good price, I would definitely be interested, Colin, as I suspect a lot of other people would as well. Back to you.
Yep, no problems at all. So we'll keep an eye out for one of those for you, Edmund. Maybe it's a little stocking filler or Christmas present for you in the future. Leslie, so I'm going to come to you first on this next news story here, because this is something that is certainly in your wheelhouse here. The ARRL has joined the RF exposure calculator group.
I don't know why you put this one to me. I cannot think of any possible reason. Thank you, Colin. This story's right up my street. Anyway, you're absolutely right. The FCC has changed its RF exposure rules, eliminating service-specific exemptions. And basically, there's a need to do routine RF safety evaluations. What can I say? I've looked at the internet and it's gone, to use a UK colloquial expression, it's gone totally bonkers. That's all I can say on the internet. Anyway, going back to it, the ARRL has produced a new calculator, which is exactly what I would expect. It talks about the power of the antenna, the mode, whether you're using SSB, FM, etc., and then your transmit receive ratio and your antenna gain in dBi and your operating frequency. And it literally, as soon as I did this calculator, I put in some numbers which I've got scattered about, and it took me less than a minute. Now, this is not onerous, people. It's, like I said, I've seen all the stuff on the internet. This took me less than a minute to do. And when you do it and you press the calculator button, it gives you a minimum safe distance, either in meters or feet, and what your power density you're allowed. And then you sort of say to yourself, well, okay, it's given me a distance of 4 meters. I'm going to put my antenna at 10 meters height, and then I'm going to print off this particular sheet. Job done. And if you look at the ARRL one, and you look at the RSGB one, and I did a spreadsheet as well, they all go along very, very similar lines. This is very straightforward, guys. It's not onerous at all. And I could sit down with any radio amateur and go through this in about 10 minutes, assuming that we've already got the information to hand. Piece of cake. And it's not about, how can I put it? Most radio amateurs would actually comply in any way. That's not the issue. It's about demonstrating compliance. And if you've done what they've asked, and then you print it off, so you've got some written evidence that you've actually done what you're supposed to do, there's not a problem at all. If somebody says, well, I'm not going to bother with all that nonsense, and it doesn't really matter whether it's in America or UK or any other country that has this type of system, good luck to them on that one, because they're on their own. Over to you, Colin.
Yeah, no problem at all. Guys, any other thoughts on the calculator the ARRL have released?
Due to a mixture of being busy, being lazy, and being disorganised, in any order you want. I haven't looked at the ARRL version as yet, although I have seen a few comments in various places online that suggests that the ARRL version is very easy to use, and that seems to be borne out by what Leslie was saying. So just out of interest, Leslie, irrespective of nationalities, if somebody was going to fill one of these in, would you suggest that they use the RSGB calculator, or does the ARRL one have any particular advantages or disadvantages?
Well, looking at the ARRL one, it looks at power at the antenna. The RSGB one has taken that a step forward, and it looks at your cable loss. Because obviously, if you're running a 100-watt transmitter, HF, the power that actually gets to the antenna could quite easily be 50 watts. So the RSGB one does take that into account, and you can choose different cables and different lengths, and it sorts it out. So I would say the RSGB one is better in that respect. Actually, if you look at the bits, the key informations, they're the same, because the equations that these calculations are derived from are very, very similar indeed. So that's what I think on that issue. I hope that helps.
Thanks, Leslie. Yes, I wasn't trying to diss the ARRL version simply because I'm in the UK, so I hope nobody got that impression. Thanks, Leslie.
The one that got me, guys, and I've had a look at this does look simpler than the RSGB calculator, in fairness, but if it works, it works. What I was going to say, exactly as you've said, Leslie, is that they're not taking into account loss in cable. So therefore, it becomes a lot easier to calculate. The only thing is you've got to know your power at your antenna. And, I can't imagine people...
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct.
Yeah, I can't imagine people on a 12-metre step ladder with a power meter in their hand going, oh, it's 100 watts here. In fairness, you've got to probably work it through yourself. And I was being flippant a little bit earlier on when we were chatting about this. And, as Leslie says, 100 watts out your transmitter, you're running 3 dB, so you lose half the power on the way to the antenna. That's a nice little feed line to keep the pigeons' toes warm in the winter when you've got of heat.
But that's not including your earth losses and all the other losses you can take. I mean, that's just a sort of rule of thumb,
Oh yeah, yeah. So, but the other thing I didn't see in this, Leslie, and maybe it's because I've looked at the information on the ARRL website, but it doesn't say at a power level you've got to start at. So technically, I suppose if I was running a half-watt transmitter, do I have to do it for the half-watt transmitter? Do this same calculation for everything? Because that's a
good question. That's a good question. I would need to check up on that.
Yeah, I can't see it in the ARRL documentation. So a starting point.
Yeah, I would not like to give an answer to that off the cuff. I would need to check.
Now, I wasn't trying to put you on a spot on this one, but that's just looking it through. So yeah, I think Colin. Yeah, Leslie's pet. This is Leslie's pet subject, and if Dan had been here, I'm sure it would have done a lot.
There's allegedly a video of me on YouTube going through all this, but like I said, what the ARRL has done, there's used to be a document. There is a document called OET65, which explains this very, very well indeed. So I suggest people have a look at that document, and these changes are just an update from that and saying, look, there are certain devices that used to be exempt and they're no longer exempt. But I would emphasize to everyone, don't jump up and down and think this is the end of the world, because it isn't. And I can assure people that we could, if somebody rang me up on Skype and said, Leslie, can you talk me through this, please? It's not a problem, and we can go through it very, very easily. Once you put the figures in and you understand what that calculation is trying to achieve, you print it off and you say, well, okay, my safety distance is this. I'm going to put my antenna so high and job done. Oh, and print it off and keep it.
Yeah, certainly. So, right, we're going to move on to the next story now. And this is a new story in relation to Solarcycle 25 and the latest information on this here. But the one thing I'm going to throw out to you guys first, I'm going to let you guys fight over who's going to answer this question here. Because we've got a lot of new licensed operators listening to the show recently, and some of them have very kindly become donors. So the question I'm going to answer on their behalf from you guys is can someone explain exactly why solar cycles are important to amateur radio and exactly how they work?
Gosh, that's the question. This reminds me of these Christmas lectures where somebody says, "Can you explain a radio wave?" And okay, I'll try and explain it. Imagine you've got like your sun source, and that's a spinning sphere, and it chucks out magnetic storms, and occasionally there's sunspots and all sorts of things that it's emanating, and these all hurtle the way through the galaxy to us. This affects our communications. And the thing that we're concerned about is the sunspot number. That goes in I think it's a 12-year cycle, or am I correct in that? I think it's 12-year cycle. Like I said, correct me if I'm wrong on that. And it goes from peaks to troughs, and depending upon the number of sunspots, that affects our critical frequency, and from that we can calculate our maximum usable frequencies. And that in turn affects propagation. And that is really fundamental to radio amateurs, which is why people like propagation teams, they look at that, they scour over the latest propagation chart to see what's occurring and which bands are up and which bands are down. So that's why that data is very, very important to us. I've actually got some apps on my phone. There are ways to do it, but there are some easy ways, like I said, some apps. And what they do is they give me like a traffic light system to show me which bands are green or amber or red. So that's why it's so important. It's absolutely fundamental to radio amateurs and propagation. Over to you, Colin. I hope that explains it.
Exactly. So now Leslie's done the heavy lifting. So we've got Solarcycle 25. And there's a lot of update here in regarding to what this is going to mean, obviously, in terms of this propagation. And we were just talking before we started, well, there's a lot of suggestions that this cycle could come early or late. There's actually quite a big window for this data. Am I right in thinking this could come sometime in 2024, 2025, could become its peak?
I think you're right on that, Colin. The initial thing was that it was supposed to happen in 25. I've also seen predictions that because of the activity, the solar peak could happen in 2024. And what will happen is as we get more ejections from the sun, it ionizes our upper layer in the ionosphere, which means that we get far longer propagation time-wise, so that hopefully we'll be sort of working the world on 10 meters in about 3 years' time. And this is not to knock the FT8 boys, but you might actually hear some voice on HF and not just digital modes when propagation gets back and people will start talking to each other, which will be good, I think, in my point of view.
Yeah, I certainly agree with you there. Certainly would be great there. And Edmund, is this obviously something that you'd be looking forward to with your operations there on the South Coast? You know, with good operating conditions you have, this must really open up some great opportunities for you to make some interesting contacts.
Well, I became licensed in 2009, which feels like a long time ago sometimes, but it isn't really in terms of an 11-year sunspot cycle. And during the time that I've been a radio amateur, I've never really lived through excellent conditions, for example 10 meters and 6 meters being open day after day all over the world with propagation via the F2 layer rather than sporadic E, for example, on 10 meters. So yes, I'm definitely looking forward to something like that because I've never experienced it. in the last 13 years or however long it is now. But I would simply make two comments. Number one, I've long since given up making predictions about pretty much everything, because pretty much every prediction that I've ever made has turned out to be wrong. And number two, don't put too much store by these predictions and the figures that you might see on certain websites online. I have made QSOs on the HF bands when on paper the bands should be absolutely dead with nothing on them at all, and the QSO that I've just made theoretically shouldn't be possible. Equally, it's also gone the other way on occasions, that on paper the band should be absolutely wide open, and I've called and ended up talking to absolutely nobody. So yes, obviously pay attention and be aware of these predictions and the data that's available on many websites, but don't sort of let it become the be all and end all of your radio operating, and certainly don't refrain from switching your radio on at all just because you've read online somewhere that 40 meters is supposed to be closed at your location to everywhere on Earth, because in practice it doesn't work like that. Back to you, Colin.
As you say, you've got to get on, make a call, and listen for the reply, haven't you? You've always said that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, definitely for that there.
Colin, can I just add a bit on there, please? Yeah, I said it was 12. Actually, I stand corrected. It's actually 11-year cycle. So I was just looking up the data furiously as we were speaking. I did actually read through this story, and it actually didn't make much sense to me. But then I went to, and if people want to have a look at it, it's called the Space Weather Prediction Center, and it actually shows the cycle over the years. Let me just get my new glasses. They're terrible. So 2017, it was minimum, and that sort of, and it's trundled along the minimum for so long, and it's just according to that their nice little visual graph in there. It's sort of slowly showing it starting to pick up again. But yeah, it can be a bit like I'm just trying to think of the word. A bit like our daily horoscope sometimes.
Oh,
but no, this is a good site, and it visually shows you what's occurring, and it makes sense of the story, and basically it says it's increasing. I would say that the fortunes of amateur radio tend to go very similar to the sunspots. So 2025 should be a very good year for radio amateurs.
so is that a good? I was going to say, is that a good year to buy a radio? Is that a good year to find a bargain at a junk fair or something like that, or is it just a good year for making great contacts?
A good year for making great contacts.
There you go. And talking about predictions,
Get your second-hand radios cheap now in preparation, because if you wait till 2025, then everybody will be having the same idea, and the second-hand prices on online auction sites will shoot up through the roof.
Yeah.
One extra quick comment. It's always worth, particularly as we get closer to 2025, but even maybe now, putting out a call on 17 meters, 18 megahertz, and 12 meters, 24 megahertz, even if those bands seem completely dead, because if there is an opening, those bands are relatively narrow. They're roughly 100 kilohertz across from top to bottom. So if somebody is listening and is tuning up and down, because that band is narrow, if you put a CQ call out, it is far more likely that that person will tune across and find you if they're in search and pounce mode than it is if you were to put out a call on, say, 15 meters, 21 megahertz, which is, 450 kilohertz wide? Because if somebody's tuning up and down that, you could arrive, call CQ and go home in the time that it takes them to tune from one end of the band to the other, so they could miss you.
Yeah, good advice, my friend.
Yeah, that's where a pan adapter helps, and
not
I've
much.
certainly found
You can really, I mean, before. I mean, I remember using the old equipment, and it was sort of the old guys sort of had a feel of what was on the band. Oh yeah, this country's coming in, and that country's coming in, and like you said, Martin, with a pan adapter, you just go, boom, that's what's happening across the band, and you can see it. And once you start using those, they're very, very useful tools indeed.
Yeah, I use my SDR player as a pan adapter on my TS590S, and it's actually a brilliant device. Yeah, and you can jump quickly to it by just, with the software, just clicking the mouse on the signal, and you're there. You haven't got to spin that dial very quickly, which I suppose takes away some of the vintage way of operating. But hey, you've got to be in it to win it. You've got to find the people, and that's the way to do it.
That's cheating.
It's technology for you.
Do you know what? There's a whole view of amateur radio in a few seconds. Is it using technology to make life easier, or is it cheating and not real radio? There you go. I'll leave that one open to everyone to discuss.
No! I can just see the internet going bonkers again.
Hey, it's my mailbox they hit. So there you go. Oh, right. Talking about bonkers things, I'm going to move you guys on to the next news story here. We've got a report coming in here from the IRTS news service here. And they've basically announced about a Swiss company has been identified for creating a ton of interference across European countries through water. So, Leslie, I don't know I think you might be the best person to pick this one up first about the interference that they're creating and how they're doing it and what sort of power they're doing to create this problem.
Well, I was reading through this. It says that a IRTS reports that devices called Wasser Matrix, sold by a Swiss company of the same name, has been identified as a source of interference on around 144 megahertz across European countries. The manufacturer claims it will vitalize, structure, or energize water, and thus making drinking water healthier and curing a wide span of diseases. I can't read all those words.
Yeah, it's a marketing man gone mad, isn't it?
Well, I'd sort of my eyes rolls to the back of my head and thought, what drugs are they on? Sorry, I don't. But anyway, the thing that caught my eye again, and they've been banned from sailing Germany after an investigation by the local communications regulator near Frankfurt Airport. Well, I think they would complain, rightly so. And these devices had calculated the EMF exposure of I could not believe. I fell off my chair when I read this, of 28 volts per meter. Now, that is crazy, absolutely crazy, and I'm not surprised they've been banned, to be honest. But yeah, what can one say? What can one say?
No, come on, say exactly. That's a lot of volts in your water, Edmund, isn't it?
Well, yes. Speaking purely with my amateur hat on, I'm pleased that these have been taken off to avoid interference on the 2 meter band, because the frequency mentioned 144.015 is right down the bottom of the band in the weak signal Earth Moon Earth CW area. So whilst no part of the band is a good place to have interference, then that spot frequency down there is probably about the worst and most catastrophic place
Absolutely
in the band
agree.
that you could have it if you are into Earth Moon Earth and weak signals and weird stuff that goes far beyond the scope of what I normally do with my little FM handheld. But the second harmonic, 288 megahertz. Now, I'm not overly familiar with that part of the electromagnetic spectrum, but I've got half an idea that that's the UHF military air band, isn't it? So maybe, if I'm right about that contributed to the manufacturer having their collar felt as well. But leaving the radio amateur side of part of it aside, just sort of on the human grounds that Leslie has commented on, 28 volts per meter. Yes, if I had a pacemaker or something fitted, I don't think I'd want to be standing right next to one of those devices. So a good outcome from the Germans. Not for the first time, I hasten to add, because we've had a few stories in recent months, haven't we, about interference causing devices being sorted out in Germany thanks to the Benetzer or whatever they call themselves out there.
Mm-hmm.
Ed Durant would tell me if he was around. Back to you, Colin.
Yeah, it's always the way. Why do all the German stories come with Ed Durant's on his week off? And I never know how we do that, I tell you. Dad, anything from you on this one? Obviously, the Germans have played a blinder, getting this one banned, but they say these are dotted throughout Europe, so hopefully the rest of the European regulators will catch up.
Yeah, I agree with the guys. I agree with both Edmund and Leslie about this. And, here we are having to do how much power we're running and all those sort of things from our antenna so we don't cause RFI to other people, and we make our life safe and everybody else around us safe. And there's products like this on the market that are potentially dangerous. I'm sorry, I know I'm a fairly physical person, I've done physics rather than biology at school and all those sort of things. I don't understand how RF can purify water, quite honestly. No, I don't, Leslie.
I don't. No, I don't either.
Is these things sound like smoke and mirror devices to me? I could be wrong, but I'm not knocking them. I mean, I'll probably get a lawsuit from them, but I don't understand how they work. And I was saying earlier that there are a lot of devices on the internet, and you look at them and you go, no, that can't work. There was one being advertised to cut your electricity bill by 90% by plugging this in the wall. I couldn't, that just didn't, to me, everything about that didn't work. So, yeah, I'm not saying this is a scam, but there are scams out there, and I really do not understand this, or from a safety point of view, why it should be allowed. And, as Edmund said, it's causing interference into the amateur band, and B, its second and third harmonics are obviously strong enough to cause problems right up into the UHF band of frequencies. And in UK, 432 megs is often used as repeater inputs.
Yeah.
And it is a military band. We are secondary users. So I hope not too many of these got installed in the UK for certain. So back to you, Colin.
No, I definitely agree. So let's see what happens there on the, let's say, on these other regulations across the board. Well, we're going to finish up our last news story here, and we're going to keep with the feature of water here. And news here in the UK that the government are coming up with a plan to connect rural homes and businesses and mobile phone masts using water pipes. So I know we were talking a lot about this one before the start and the benefits of this, etc., Dad. And again, this could be a great opportunity to connect up more of Britain to high-speed internet.
Yeah, I agree with you, Colin. And I looked at this and thought, yeah, okay, if you're going to put fibre optics in with the drinking water, and let's face it, water fed to houses is drinking water, so it's clean, it's bad. But not having metal in there means it's not going to rust and you're not getting corrosion. So as long as the jackets are of the fibre optics is safe and not producing any chemicals off it, putting it in the water pipes is an easy, quick way to move from A to B. And they talk about doing this in rural areas to get high-speed broadband to people's houses without digging up roads, miles of roads and one thing and another. But I also think that businesses in cities, London, New York, Chicago, Sydney, to name but a few, obviously others are there, should also benefit from this, because the last thing any of us want to do when we're driving in the city is to be there while they're digging the roads up and sitting in traffic jams. So could be an interesting one. I hope well, it's obviously going to be a test, but I hope the fibre optic survives in the water, because obviously water under pressure and a flow of water will mean it might make the fibre optic vibrate, and I don't know if it will break the fibre optic over time, but you've got to try these things, I think, Colin.
Yeah, true. Now, I was saying to you guys before we started, in my old house, they ran the fibre about 2 kilometres on a rural road in the chambers of the service ducts that were coming up with other pipes and, sort of grey water type of waste, etc. Now, we had that service for 3 years, and I've got to be honest, it was the best internet service I've ever had. So I know that service 3 years isn't necessarily long term, but yeah, there would be maybe some positives on that there. Edmund, what about yourself? I know you're in an area that could do with a bit of a boost on the broadband. Would this be something that you'd be very positive towards, and can you perceive any potential pitfalls?
Well, I would welcome it, especially as at the moment they seem to be digging up the roads left, right, and centre round here. So plenty of opportunities to stick some fibre optic cables down some water pipes, and yeah, as long as the presence of the fibre optic cables doesn't cause problems with the water distribution, because I imagine those fibre optic cables would take up a certain amount of space, and that presumably would impact on the flow of water going down there. But assuming it didn't block it up to any great extent, then I'm all for it, and particularly if they can include some detectors in the fibre optic cable, perhaps to identify any water leaks, 2 for the price of 1.
Yeah, but they never do that though. They never open it up, put one thing in, and close it all back up again, and open it up later on and think we should have put something in the first place. So that's certainly the case, isn't it, Leslie? The local council always loves an opportunity to open up the roads. So would they be as smart as to run it really through water pipes?
Well, if you know anything about the roadworks in London, I'm sure some of these people, their previous life was moles. They just dig up holes. It drives me up the wall.
Yeah.
But anyway, going back to this topic, I think it's a good idea, and what I think they ought to do is trial it and just see what happens. We have an idea on paper, let's, and once you stop doing things practically over a period of time, you can actually see what problems there are and what benefits there are. I'm just saying, trial it, see what happens. I'm all for having a go at ideas, providing there was sensible ones, not like the one we had previously.
True. So we'll keep an eye on that one, but hopefully, I say some better access going around there for everybody in the UK, and as well. It's a UK story. You'd also hope that if this works, it could hopefully help people around the world as well to get better connectivity along the way. Right, guys. Well, I know I'm always excited to hear every episode what you guys have been up to and what you've been working on there. Leslie, we'll start with yourself and find out what new, wonderful, interesting things you've been up to in the last month since you were last on the show.
Well, what I've been messing about with is at the local club. As you know, we've got an ICOM 7300, which we've still been playing with and trying to find our way through all the functions and all the rest of it. But one of the things I've been playing with is AM. Because on Facebook there is an AM Amateur Radio Society page, and I've been following them and messing about on the air and that type of thing on 80 metres, and they started this AM Amateur Radio Society. So I was looking at what they were doing. They put together a constitution and all that stuff and got affiliated, which is great. And a guy called Simon Taylor, I'm going to give him a plug because I think he's doing a grand job, and his call sign is Mike Whiskey 0 November Whiskey Mike. That's Mike Whiskey 0 November Whiskey Mike, and he put this up on Facebook, and I duly sent off my £5.50, and now I'm a member of the AM Amateur Radio Society. So it's going to be good. Just messing about, why not?
Oh, lovely. Well, the great thing is the fact is that if you're getting value from it and you're enjoying it, That's the biggest plus, isn't it? So great to hear that new club, which I know we first spotted back around about Easter time. It's great to hear that they're progressed along nicely, and great to hear a report that they're doing they're good things. So appreciate you giving us all a shout and letting us know about that.
Anytime.
Edmund, what about yourself on the south coast there of England? Anything going on that you'd like to share with the group?
Well, I won an SDR. What's it called? SDR Play version 2.
Nice.
No, that's not the exact title, is it? Sorry, it's been a long day at work. People who are familiar with the device will know what its proper title is, but an SDR Play Mark II. So having come out with the comment earlier about that's cheating, talking about a PAN adapter, I've basically got myself a device that I could use as a PAN adapter. But all I've done with it really so far is a bit of FM broadcast band listening and some shortwave broadcast band listening as well, because I used to do that in the years before I got my amateur radio license. And perhaps if Solarcycle 25 genuinely is on the up, it might be a good time now or in the years ahead to do a bit more shortwave broadcast listening once again. Elsewhere, seeing as we've mentioned PMR 446, on the very latest edition of Radio User magazine, August 2021, on the front cover there is a picture of a hand holding a Florian FC200 legal 500 milliwatt PMR 446 radio. The photograph was taken last September at the Iordish picnic site I think it's in Derbyshire. I was on holiday at the time, and that is me. So if you want to know what my left hand looks like, go and buy a copy of Radio User magazine. But it's thanks to Tim Kirby, Golf Whiskey 4 Victor X-Ray Echo, and his excellent Push to Talk column. PMR 446 has been mentioned in Radio User quite a lot in the latest edition for the first time in a long time, and it was well overdue, so well worth a read. I'm not paid by them, incidentally, I should mention. I'm just a happy reader and somebody who writes to them occasionally, but there's no commercial relationship between Radio User and me, thank goodness, because no magazine, no self-respecting magazine would want me writing for them every month, I don't think. A couple of times every few years is enough. And last but not least, the weekend after this podcast, this episode of the podcast is released, that's, I think I'm right in saying, Saturday the 21st and Sunday the 22nd of August. That is my favourite amateur radio weekend of all, because it's the International Lighthouse and Lightship weekend. So, weather permitting, and I won't go down there if there are flash floods or heat waves or violent winds, but failing that, I will be down at Shoreham Lighthouse in East Sussex, using the call sign Golf Bravo 2 India Sierra Lima, International Shoreham Lighthouse, on the air Saturday afternoon and evening probably, and maybe other times as well if Solarcycle 25 is kind to me. But more importantly than that, it will be a major milestone in the Megacycle DX expedition, which has been underway since the beginning of August. Kevin G0PEK and his daughter Lauren, 2 Echo Zero Hotel Lima Romeo, are currently pedalling their way from Land's End and ultimately to John O'Groats. They've had a few technical problems so far, but they've used their initiative and have done really, really well, despite a few mishaps along the way as well. So I'm absolutely rooting for them. And if everything goes to plan for the International Lighthouse Lightship weekend, they will be at Cape Wrath Lighthouse in Scotland, using the call sign Golf Bravo 5 Charlie Whiskey Lima, GB5CWL. It will be a QRP operation. if they do make it there, I think they're only going to be using a Yaesu FT817, so 5 watts. But if you're around that weekend, and if you are lighthouse hunting, then that is the one to get, because they will have done so well to get there and pedalled so many hundreds of miles. They deserve an absolutely phenomenal session at Cape Rough Lighthouse and many QSOs. So if you're lighthouse hunting that weekend, that is the one to get, and that is the one that I'm certainly going to be trying to get into the logbook. And last but not least, on the Sunday, the 22nd of August from 10 till 4, if lighthouses isn't your thing, the Ham Radio Network on Facebook have organised a Grand Field Day out at Willesborough Windmill at Ashford in Kent. And it's a social meet-up outdoors with a car boot sale and some catering. But more interestingly, from my point of view, I believe they're going to put a special event station on the air. So the call sign there will be Golf Bravo 5 Hotel Alpha Mike GB5 Ham, or possibly just G5 Ham. Not sure which one they'll be using. So weekend after release, there is certainly a lot going on the airwaves. So anybody who's set up for HF, ignore what the propagation forecasts tell you. If it says that Solarcycle 25 has disintegrated and nothing is doing on any bands at all, and you might as well go down the pub, don't believe a word of it. Switch your radios on, call CQ, and you will, if you stick at it long enough, you will get some interesting call signs in your logbook. Back to you, Colin.
I'm sure my chuckling in the background will be
will be fully left in.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, Dad, we've already announced we have a some downtime weekend, so I'm going to wish you in advance happy birthday for this weekend, and I won't let the listeners down by 10-year-old you are, but let you just know, guys, I'm getting old. But happy birthday for this weekend in advance, and hopefully you've got some plans for the weekend and have done some interesting stuff over the last few days.
Right. Well, I've got a list here. I'll try and make it as quick as possible. But seeing as you mentioned it's my birthday, or our birthday on Friday, before the podcast goes out, I'm going to tell you that I have to be up at 4 o'clock Friday morning to go to work. I decided I wouldn't open any cards or anything till I got home from work at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I thought I'd spend some time. Mrs. being opening my cards on one thing and another. And then Mr. Rothwell has booked me to go to the repeater site Friday afternoon. I forgot, didn't I? I forgot I promised to be home with Carol. So I'm on the hospital roof Friday afternoon before this goes out. And hopefully we can sort the problems out with GB3XP. What else have I been up to? Well, I've been playing with home automation. Bought a small home automation kit. Lidl's have produced one. Others are available from other companies and one thing or another. But it's got 3 smart bulbs, and I bought a controller, 3 smart bulbs, and like a on-off switch thing in the box. I've also bought some plug-in devices that plug into 13-amp sockets, which you can control over the internet. And works very, very well. So, I can now turn off my hotspots remotely if need be across the internet if they're causing a problem while I'm not at home. So that worked very, very well. Did have some FT8 contacts. Just been sort of making sure that I really have got rid of the RFI in my shack, which did turn out to be the computer in the end. And that seems perfectly okay. Spent a reasonable amount of time on 2 meter 77s and 4 meters. Quite a few contacts on all of those, which has been good. Biggest pain in my life for the last few months, 3 months, has been I bought an FT70 for Christmas. Or sorry, Mrs. B bought me an FT70 for Christmas. And don't get me wrong, it's a lovely radio. Really like it. Absolutely brilliant. But it's got the standard handheld or handy-talky life cycle of the battery. In that the battery lasts around about 8 hours on receive, maybe a bit longer, but in use, I'm not getting much more than 8 hours out of it. So I use it one day and then I have to charge it. So I tried ordering another battery, and I ordered a battery and it arrived, but they sent me the wrong battery. So I sent it back to the people. They then just returned it straight back to me. So I spoke to the senior partner of the reseller, and they refunded my money and the postage, which was very nice, and told me to keep the old battery. So I have an FT60 battery that I don't need, but I'm sure somebody will make use of it at some point in time. I then ordered another battery from a different supplier, only to find I waited 6 weeks and then be told from the supplier, the senior supplier, oh, sorry, it's been lost in the system somewhere. So in the end, I ended up ordering a battery from one of the emporiums. It cost me quite a bit more from the emporium, but you know what? I just got fed up waiting for it to come. And with the electronic shortage at the moment, I could probably wait a lot longer. Talk Group 9480 has been fairly busy and nicely possible way. I can't remember the guy's call sign, but just before we went to record, Colin and I were having a chat, and Willie from Cork called in, and I just said, hi, can't hold it. You know, we're doing a couple of bits and pieces, about to record a podcast, but nice to talk to you. I'll catch up with you soon. So there are people calling through the talk group. It's not as busy as it has been in the early stages, but we're now up to 30 countries as of the 1st of August. So, it's happening quite nicely. I have tried to get into your 10-metre repeater, Edmund, from where I am, and I'm not making it in. So I did try. I'll try again when the Solarcycle gets better, but it's been a worthwhile trying. So kind of that's what I've been up to. Lots of little things. Spending time on the radio at work whenever possible, but work's got busier, so I'm not available as much as I used to be. So there you go, Colin.
Yeah, no, exactly. Well, guys, sounds like you're all very, very busy, and hopefully what you're up to has whetted the appetite of our listeners for some ideas and projects and things they can get involved in, if they have any downtime, or if there's anything floating around they want to take involved in. Well, I want to thank you guys for joining me on this news roundtable. Thanks to Leslie, Golf Zero, Charlie, India Bravo, to Edmund, Mike Zero, Mike November Golf, and obviously to you, Dad Martin, M1MRB. Thanks for joining me, Colin M6BLY, the news roundtable. And we're now going to head over to our news in brief section and on to our feature. So I hope you continue to enjoy the show. And I'll just bid our contributors here, 73s, and say we'll move on to the next part of the show. 73s all.
Cheerio.
Yeah, 73.
7-3.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BLY. We start off with news here of a mail that's been sent in by Mike Brennick, Sierra Papa to Juliet, and Mike tells us he's going to be operating on a steel schooner, the Gedania, and it's going to be operating in the northern Baltics. He'll be working 20 and 40 metres between the 14th of August and the 22nd of August, and so you can hear out his call sign Sierra Papa 2 Juliet /Mike of a maritime mobile. So hopefully, I say he'll be in better success than he had in June, where unfortunately technical issues meant that he was unable to make contacts like he was hoping to. So Mike, best of luck for you as you operate there in the northern Baltic. And as I say, hopefully listeners can listen out for the call sign Sierra Papa 2 Juliet /Mike. Well, this weekend, amongst other things, is the QSO Online Expo, QSO Day Online Expo, and along those same lines, the RSGB will be moving its convention, which was planned for the 9th of October, to an online event So that will be taking place on the 9th of October. Now, the RSGB have advised that the event will be streamed on the RSGB's YouTube channel, and they'll be announcing very soon a great lineup of expert speakers to inspire people. So again, you can find more information about this event by visiting rsgb.org/convention. And our last news story takes place in Ireland, and another event we've got going on this month is the International Lighthouse and Lightships Weekend. And the Hook Lighthouse in Ireland will be activated on that weekend of the 21st and 24th of August as part of the 24th version of the Lightships and Lighthouse Weekends. It's going to be activated by the South Eastern Amateur Radio Group, EI2 Whiskey Romeo Charlie. So they'll be activating that very famous lighthouse. So Hook Lighthouse is in the southeast corner of Ireland, and is a very important lighthouse, in particular for the ferries coming over from the UK, etc. So we'll put more information about this activation on the ICQ podcast webpage, and hopefully you can listen out for the guys there and help them have a successful weekend. Right, everybody, we're going to head over to our features episode, where this episode we answer questions and answers from the listeners and people we've been speaking to over the last few weeks, along with a few tips as well. So as always, guys, hope you enjoy.
And now what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast. Hi guys, for this feature I wanted to cover off a couple of questions I've been asked quite recently, which may be of use to beginners, and it might help you, if you know this, it might help you to explain it to newbies coming into the hobby, with a couple of interesting tips I think that would be useful for us experienced hams if you happen to come across some of these. So the first off one I got asked the other week was, why are there so many RF connectors? And in fairness, I can understand somebody coming into the hobby going, I really don't understand why you've got so many. I mean, I've seen the standard audio phono plug used on some QRP rigs, and that's not an RF connector for certain. So kind of as we go forward, anybody coming into the hobby looks at all these different connectors and thinks, why? Well, the main reason is that they all have been designed over time to do a specific job. Now, we always say that you choose the right connector for the particular radio you've got and the frequencies you want to use. So that's the first clue. They are frequency specific in many ways. So if you take a PL259 plug, for argument's sake, that's good up to about 150 megahertz. But above that, it starts getting lossy. Now, I know some manufacturers still fit SO239s on the back of radios so that you plug a PL259 into it, but it isn't ideal at UHF. You get losses. And that's the other thing. At certain frequencies, the losses go up. So you don't want loss in your antenna feed line. And if your connectors are causing you loss, that's a pain. Also, the fact is that the impedance of the device changes as the frequencies go up. If you look at the physical construction, they are different because they're trying to cut down on mechanical variance and keep the impedance correct. And if you go right up into really high frequencies, you might even find you'll use SMA connectors. And these are really small, but they work extremely well at very, very high frequencies and up into microwaves. So it really does depend on what you're trying to do and what frequencies and what operating you're intending to do. The other thing is, it's not even that easy, because if you have for argument's sake, a PL259 plug, there's probably at least half a dozen different variants you can get. There's ones you can solder. There's crimp ones. There's different size of coax that fits into your PL259. And this is the same for all plugs. So when you're buying some PL259s at a rally, you need to be aware of what the cable size is, A, you're going to use, and B, what the person's going to sell you. Because there are differences, and some of them are quite subtle. 6mm and 7mm or 8mm look very, very similar when you're in a field talking to somebody at a rally. So, yeah, there's lots of reasons, but the reason we have so many different connectors is purely to do with, as we've moved up in frequencies, we need to reduce our losses, maintain our impedance on our line, and also the different size of cables we're using. So hopefully, for a newbie, that will help you. Now, this one's a tip. This one was given to me by Phil Heckingbottom, BK6ADF. And we were chatting one day, and he said to me, I run this piece of software on my Raspberry Pi. It's called Ham Clock. Now, Ham Clock is one of these absolutely gorgeous pieces of software that's been written by an amateur that is available for free. You need a Raspberry Pi, although I have managed to get it to work on a Linux desktop. You install it, all the instructions are on the website how to install it, and it comes up and shows you various things like pictures of the sun, the path between the two stations, your station and the station you're calling. It can show you satellite passes, it can show you temperatures, all sorts of things, too many to mention here. But if you're sitting in the shack one day and you're thinking, I just fancy trying something else out, have a look at Ham Clock. And certainly if you've got a Raspberry Pi kicking around, it's worth installing it on that, and then you could VNC onto a Raspberry Pi to have it up on the display, or you could actually connect a spare monitor that you've had kicking around for a long time, and makes much sense. Now, these are very good and gives you predictions of sunspots and all those sort of things. You can very, very customizable. Moving to our next question, really. This was from a newbie who I was talking to. I only have 10 watts. Why can I not make lots and lots of contacts with people at the moment? Well, the simple answer is, at the moment, we're just coming out the bottom of the sunspot cycle, so the ionosphere is not in a particularly good shape. However, you have to be in it to win it, so you do need to make calls as well. Unfortunately, lots of main big stations have their RF gain turned up so high that they don't often hear us QRP stations. That's another thing. But SSB is all about getting your radio set up. Now, get your radio set up. Make sure your microphone gain is good. If you're a serious SSB operator, you're probably going to change the microphone. You might put one of these processing devices in line with your microphone to make it more punchy. But the main thing that everybody does when they start off in this hobby is they get an HF rig and they believe they must have an ATU, an antenna tuner. Guys, if you're a QRP operator, the last thing in the world you want is an ATU. Pick a band you want. Pick a band and just tune your antenna for efficiency on that band. Work single band operation. I know it's a pain and you have to carry more. But the thing is, if you only got 10 watts and 5 of it is being sent back to your ATU to be dumped as heat, then you're actually only transmitting 5 watts anyway. So, and often it can be a lot worse than that. So, you complain you only got 10 watts, but you're throwing at least half of it away. So, good cable, make sure you got the right coax cable, reduce the losses on the antenna, and that should help you get on and make lots of contacts in QRP. And as we hit the sunspot maximum, I'm sure things will liven up phenomenally and you'll be able to make lots of contacts with 10 watts. But all the things I've said about improving your antenna and your audio certainly will help there as well. Okay, this is a little tip I'm going to suggest. Over here in the UK, you can't buy incandescent light bulbs. You know, the standard light bulb with the tungsten filament in it. Now, there are places that still have them, and I would suggest, as a radio amateur, these might be very, very useful to us. I certainly have a few stashed away. Now, what do I use them for? Well, those who've heard me talk about repairing things, you can often put a light bulb in series with a piece of mains equipment. So if you're powering something up and it suddenly goes short circuit inside, or a capacitor lets go or whatever, it protects the radio from going up in smoke. The light bulb will light up brightly. So I put in light bulbs in series with a mains powered device and bring them up, usually on a variac, but the light bulb acts as a current limiter. So in that instance, putting in series would act as a current limiter. And something like about a 60 watt bulb is ideal, but 40 watt and 100 watt bulbs are just as useful. So don't throw those away. Another thing is, sometimes we want to do tests on power supplies. You've got a 12 volt or 13.8 volt power supply, and you may want to make sure it works, but every time you put the multimeter on it, it shows 13.8. Then you put it under load, and it drops or it trips. Now, how would you load up a power supply? And one of the ways you could do that is the old car bulbs, and they're worth looking out for as well nowadays. But the old-fashioned car bulbs, the headlamp bulb or dip bulb, they become very good loads for power supplies because they're meant to work on 12 volts. So you can strap them across a 12 volt supply, and they will make sure that you draw some current, and then you can measure the power supply under load. Now, how many bulbs you put on in parallel will depend on how much current you want to draw, and equally how much current the power supply can supply. But that's a way of testing a power supply under load without putting it on your expensive radio and hoping for the best. Moving on, another little tip here that newbies probably don't know, but then I've also spoken to lots of amateurs that also don't know this. You're driving into a car park. Normally the car parks in the UK are about 6'6" or about 2 meters tall. And there you are with your nice big antenna on the top of the car. And I've been talking to a number of people, and they've said, well, should I get a short antenna to go into a car park? Well, the answer to that is yes and no. It depends. If you regularly go in and out of lots of car parks and you don't want to do anything other than just drive in, then you're probably into a smaller or shorter 2m70 type antenna. However, most antennas have a fold-over option, which a lot of amateurs don't know about. If you hold the base of the antenna and you pull the whip up, it will rise about 1/4 of an inch, or about, let's say a centimetre, and then it will fold over at 90 degrees. So if you've got a big antenna on your car and you're going into a car park, it's worth checking that your antenna does this. And 99% of all antennas do it, and quite a few amateurs don't even know about it. So, in fairness, a great little tip, I think, but I was asked, and it's down to you whether you decide you want to do this or not. Last thing I'm going to talk about was another tip, and one I got shouted at very early on when I just passed my license. I went out with the boys, and at the end of a session, we were packing up. No problems at all with that, and I'm quite a helpful person. So I went and tried to pack up the feed line, the coax feed line, and this G3 screamed at me. And then he calmed down, and then he told me what I was doing wrong. Now, to prolong your life with your coax feeder, if you look at coax feeder, when it comes off the drum, it comes off a drum, so it's circular, and it's folded, it has a natural curve to be rolled up in the way it came off the drum. So when you're trying to roll up coax, you don't hold one bit in your hand and roll it between your hand and your elbow, because you will get screamed at. What you do is you roll the coax up the way it wants to go. So you take one end and you start rolling it, and you can twist it on the ground so it's always coming on to you. And don't coil it up too tight. Have a nice, easy bend. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to roll the coax up in the way that it wants to be rolled up, so you're not stressing the coax. And if you do that, you will find that you'll prolong the life of your coax for many, many years, because you'll reduce the stress on the coax. And if you roll it up properly, the coax will give you a long, long length of life in the field. And bearing in mind, coax ain't cheap these days, boys. So the longer we make sure that we carry on using it, the better it is for our pockets. Okay, only a couple of quickies on this one. A few tips, a few questions answered. Hopefully that was of use. And we'll listen for any other questions that may come in at odd times. Thank you very much.
The ICQ podcast. Come for a moment. Stay for an hour.
Well, everybody, I really hope you've enjoyed this episode 357 of the ICQ podcast, and hopefully our feature there on questions, answers and tips covered some things you might have been asking yourself, or say started some thought-provoking ideas about some of the things discussed there. Now, as always, it's very kind donors that keep us advert-free in the ICQ podcast, so we'd like to thank again David Reed, Whiskey 6 Kilo Lima, and David Strachan, to Mike Zero Whiskey Hotel X-Ray for their very kind donations to the show, and along with the monthly and subscription donors, they've kept us advert free. As I mentioned, if you've had enjoyment and value from this episode of the ICQ podcast, we'd ask you to visit icqpodcast.com/donate, where, as I say, think of the value you've received from the show, turn it into a monetary value, and pop it along our way to help keep the show running and keep it advert free. I'd also like to thank Leslie, Golf Zero, Charlie, India Bravo, Martin, Mike 1, Mike Romeo Bravo, and Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, for taking part in the News Roundtable along with myself, and thank you guys for taking part in the show. Now, as always, as I say, it's great for you to keep in touch with us, so there's lots of ways you can reach out to us. There's the ICQ Podcast Facebook group that you can join, and there's obviously as well our Twitter handles at Colin Butler and at M1MRB, and you can also click on the Contact Us button on the ICQpodcast.com website as well to keep in contact with us. Something that new listeners may not know, we've also got a YouTube channel that can be found at youtube.com/ICQ podcast, which has some of the interviews and meetings we've had with people in previous Hamfests, etc. So if you're missing a Hamfest, or you want to see our faces as well as hear our voices, you can visit that YouTube channel and check out the content we have there for you as well. All right, that just about wraps up things for this episode of the ICQ podcast. So this episode is recorded on Martin and mine's birthday weekend. So we're actually up with our families, doing things for our birthdays this weekend and being thoroughly sports. So we thank them for that. But as I say, we're going to bid you all 73s and wish you much enjoyment from the hobby. And more importantly, we'll catch you up again in a fortnight's time. 73s all.